You are listening to Prophet Pearls with Nehemia Gordon and Keith Johnson, exploring biblical prophecy for yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Shalom and welcome to Prophet Pearls Face-to-Face in the City of the Prophets, recorded live from the Safe House in Jerusalem with Keith Johnson and Nehemia Gordon. That's me. That's it. That's my intro.
Okay. All right.
Previously on Prophet Pearls. I will find you. No, come on.
I'm going to take the hat off is what I want to know.
No, I love the hat. Okay. You're making fun of my hat. Okay. Can I tell the people?
No, you can't. No, folks, we're going to get started. We're in the Ezekiel. Nehemia. Every time we're going to do Ezekiel, I always have to be reminded of just the opening of that phrase. Now, before we get to Ezekiel,
opening what phrase?
Ezekiel chapter 22,
verse 1.
Ben
Adam, man.
Yeah, no,
Son of man?
Ben Adam, no.
What's your?
No. So let me ask a question. What's the connection here with the Torah pearls? What's the
Torah portion?
Yeah, with the portion here.
What do you got?
I'm asking you the question. You're supposed to, you just go, and then you tell us what
I have an hypothesis. It's interesting. The last one we did was about lepers, and the section of the Torah was about leprosy. Mm-hmm. Here, the connection isn't so obvious.
Okay.
So I have a theory, but it's not so clear.
It's not clear.
And look, this was tradition, the connection, and sometimes it was by something having to do with association. Mm-hmm. And my feeling is the association here is really at the end we have this image of the crucible that God's going to purify us through fire. Mm-hmm. And this Torah portion opens up. It's the portion of Achrei Mot, Leviticus 16:1 through 18:30. And it talks about it says this happened after Nadav and Avihu were killed by the fire. Mm-hmm. So there's fire that came down from heaven when they offered a strange fire. Mm-hmm. They were, instead of the sacrifice being burned up, the offering being burned up, they were burned up because they were following the ritual contrary to the commandment. That's one possibility of the connection.
So give me this. One of the things that just kind of hit me was I like, anytime I see this phrase, it says, Vayehi devar Yehovah, and the word was, it came, the word of Yehovah. And it's funny because in English, and I'm probably in Hebrew, it's also the case, you just can kind of move past that. Well, let's get to what it was. Uh-huh. But just the thought that the word came. Yeah. That God, gave his word, he sent his word came, and I want to know how you would translate Vayehi. In other words,
Vayehi literally means "and it was."
And it was.
The literal translation of Ezekiel 22:1 is, "And the word of Yehovah was to me, saying." Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In English, you translate it as the word came or came to pass. Mm-hmm. Hebrew says it as was, and in English and in Indo-European languages.
So why do I get excited about that little phrase? What is it about that phrase? Why do you get excited about that little phrase? Do you get excited about that phrase?
I do, because he's sitting there and the word is to him. Mm-hmm.
And
that's
so
cool.
Yeah, and it is. And the reason it gets exciting to me is because, and this is one little technical aspect, when it says Vayehi, what's the phrase itself? So it's taking the verb I am, and it's saying, okay.
The verb to be.
To be, yeah. I'm saying, but then again, that reminds me of him. He was, he is, he shall be. So,
so the verb is haya, hey yud hey. Mm-hmm. Can that be the word of the week?
Yeah, that would be great. Do that.
Hey yud hey is the word of the week, and that is to be. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. One of the things I learned studying languages is that the word to be tends to be the most irregular word in many languages. Mm-hmm. So, for example, think about in English, I walked, I will walk, I am walking. It's always walk. It doesn't really change. Yep. Walk, you add things, whatever. The word to be is I am, he is, they are. What's going on here? Imagine if you're not, a native English speaker. They were, he was, they will be. It's so many different forms in English of the word to be. So Hebrew isn't that bad. In Hebrew, haya, hey yud hey. In the what we call the inverted future, it becomes Vayehi, and he was. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not going to go into all the complicated tenses of Hebrew or modes of inverted.
Can you believe we're having that conversation? No. We were talking about, why isn't there a dot in the yud? And it's such. I remember that conversation. Yeah. We were going to the doctor.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and actually, we've had this phrase before. We actually had this exact phrase.
Vayehi?
Yeah, Vayehi.
Okay, well, it's very common. In fact, many sections begin with Vayehi. And in fact, today we're pre-recording this. We're about to come on to Purim, and the scroll of Esther opens up Vayehi b'mei Achashverosh.
Yes,
Vayehi, and it was in the days of Achashverosh. And you have to. And here's where it gets complicated. when they would translate this into Greek, I talk about this in my book, The Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus, they had a problem because in Greek, if you translate literally "and it was," it makes no sense. You say "and what was." But that's actually how it's translated in the Septuagint. For example, I'm looking here, Ezekiel 22:1 in the Septuagint. It says, Kaya geneto logos kuriou pros mem legon. Kaya geneto is "and it was." And a Greek reader reading this would say "and what was." And so that's why in English you'll tend to translate it "and it came to pass." It's more of a loose translation, less literal, but it makes more sense in your target language. So we have in Hebrew, "and it was," vayehi, but then "he was" is haya, "he is" hoveh, Yehyeh, he will be. Yeah. And then God says to Moses, he says, Ehyeh, I will be. They translate that as I am, which isn't entirely wrong, but it more literally is I will be. And then God says, this is my name, Yehovah, which is he was, he is, he will be, he is to come. So he says of himself, I will be, and then he gives his name, his actual name, which it means he was, he is, he is to come, he will be.
You know, something I've been hinting around about this. I'm still not ready to fully talk about it, but I just think there are ways that people need to be able to get some of these tools so they can understand it. Because when you're saying that, you know, oftentimes I'll make fun of you. You say, "Well, it's obvious," blah 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 blah, and I'll say, "What do you mean it's obvious? It's not obvious to people
in second grade."
But I mean for people who don't interact with the text. But I think as the closer and closer, I should say, the further and further we go along, I think there are more and more people that are willing to go through a little bit of the process to understand some of the things. So, for example, what you just mentioned with that verb, the haya verb, I mean, a lot of people have no clue. Like, even though you explained it, they don't know what it is. But I do think there are ways for people to learn that. And so we're in the process now, even as we speak, discussing how to help people understand that a little bit better, how they can understand some of those concepts a little bit better so that they can interact with the original language of Scripture. So, but when I see this
stop
phrase...
beating around a bush.
Well,
give us your ministry minute.
I can't give the ministry minute because I'm in the process. I'm sick. I got to tell you, my back's against the wall. But soon, hopefully in the next couple of days, I'm going to be able to talk about this. I can't even get to it. It's really been hard. But I want to say something about the phrase.
In riddles.
No, but about this phrase. The reason it's exciting me about the phrase is that when I see the phrase now, I think about his name. So in other words, it's not, in other words, and it came to pass. Okay, well, no, I mean, he came. His revelation is coming. The word of Yehovah coming to Ezekiel. And we find this, I don't know how many phrases, how many times, but I think in Ezekiel you see it a lot.
The word of Yehovah.
Yeah, and the word of Yehovah came unto me, and the word of Yehovah came unto me.
Interesting.
We see it a lot.
Check it out.
Actually, it's one of my key verses is Ezekiel chapter 1 verse 3.
You've got like 50 key verses. I keep hearing more key verses.
This is a key verse.
So 251 times in the Tanakh we have the phrase word of Yehovah, Deval Yehovah.
Wow. How many times in the book of Ezekiel? Come on, you can do it. Help us tell us in the time the word the book of Ezekiel. And while he's doing that, so imagine this, you're Ezekiel.
58 in Ezekiel, which is 20% of them.
That's
about
amazing. I thought there would be a lot. Okay, so let's get into this, Nehemia.
Yeah. The word of Yehovah came to me saying.
Yes. Son of man. Now, are we going to be able to get past that? Or
I mean, we've talked about that.
We have talked about it. Son of man, will you judge her? Will you judge this city? And you know, it's funny because it says, will you judge her? And then, will you judge this city of bloodshed? Then confront her with all of her, and it uses the word here in English, the detestable practices.
In Hebrew, it's abominations.
It's the abominations.
Same word as abominations.
And I tell you what, man, that word, the first time I ever looked at that word, scared the heck out of me.
Yeah.
No, I mean, why? Because, I mean, the things that are an abomination, I guess I was a little surprised. Really? I was a little surprised. Yes, okay. I was. I mean, do you know?
So what are some of the abominations?
No, I don't know if we want to
talk about it.
Sure, we can. Tell me one that would surprise you.
So, for example, Deuteronomy 14, it talks about abominations. Is it Deuteronomy 14? Yeah, I believe it is. So, for example, right there at the beginning, verse 3, it says, hold on. It says, "You shall not eat any abomination."
Exactly.
Yeah. And then that's the exact same word, abomination, toivah. And then there's a list of the abominations, the pig and etc. Whatever, and the worms and all that stuff. Yeah.
Or holding the rat.
Holding the rat, yeah. Eating the rat.
Eating the rat.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is what these are. These are abominations. And
what is an abomination? It literally means something God hates.
It's literally something he hates, yes.
The ta'ev is to hate, to despise something, and an abomination is that which is despised by Yehovah. And what is this city of blood? Is this talking about Babylon, the whore?
And that's the question. We're going to find out what the city of blood is.
Well, you read ahead. What is it?
The city of blood. Then confront her with all her detestable practice. And it's going to tell us about the city. Hold on one second.
Yeah.
It says, and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, O city that brings on herself doom by shedding blood in her midst and defiles herself by making idols. And one more verse, and then I want to ask a background question. You have become guilty because of the blood you have shed and have become defiled by the idols you have made. You have brought your days to a close, and the end of your years has come. Therefore I will make you an object of scorn to the nations and a laughingstock to all the countries. One last verse. Those who are near and those who are far away will mock you, O infamous. Oh, it says here, O infamous city full of turmoil. And the reason I'm slowing down a little bit is because whenever I'm thinking of prophets, you think about what they call different prophets, like Jeremiah or Isaiah. They call him the eagle-eye prophet. This is the background.
Who calls him the eagle-eye prophet?
In my heritage, he's called the eagle-eye prophet.
I never heard
But let me
that.
ask a question: when you think of Ezekiel, what do you think of? Like when you think of him, what do you think of? What would be a description for Ezekiel?
So I think the first association for most Jews is what we call Maaseh Melkavah, and we did that section. It's the the vision of the chariot, the vision of the divine chariot, the seraphim, or not the seraphim. What was that with the wheels?
Yeah, and the wheels
wheel inside a wheel and all that stuff. That's the first thing most people think. When I think of Ezekiel, the first thing I think of is something that was really tragic in his life, which is that his family was killed and he wasn't able to mourn until he heard the announcement that Jerusalem was destroyed. And at that point, God finally, after all that time, let him mourn. And the mourning, the sadness, the crying was over both Jerusalem and his family. And it was a way for him to say, okay, I can't fully understand what it means for Jerusalem to be destroyed unless I realize, wow, this is like my wife and my children dying. So to me, he's this tragic figure.
Yeah, it's funny when I think of him. Oftentimes people talk of Ezekiel because he says, "Okay, this is going to describe the third temple and all of that." That's certainly one part of it. The part of it that I think about is a little more of the reality of life. Like the tragedy, like you say, the tragic figure, the tragedy of life. Like here's this guy who's prophesying, and he has to do all these certain things, and he's got to demonstrate it this way, and it's just. Man, he's got a tough go. He really has a tough go.
Yeah.
So. Anyway, so
what's the city of blood?
The city of blood.
What do you got, Keith?
Well, I guess the city of blood will have to be representing somewhere in Israel.
It's Jerusalem.
It's got to be Jerusalem.
It's got to be Jerusalem. The city of blood. And yes. We talked, and in my intro I mentioned the city of the prophets, and that's true too.
Yeah.
But it was also the city of blood that spilled blood. There's this image in Jeremiah. He talks about how and in other places about how Jerusalem was filled with blood.
Yes.
And that was really in the time of King Manasseh. That was the low point of the history of the history of Israel, where the city, there's blood flowing through the streets. That's how many innocent people were murdered. And here in Ezekiel, he's talking about the city of blood, and you're guilty because of your abominations in the city of blood. So the abominations aren't just what we might call ritual abominations.
Yes,
they're also their actions are abominable. Murder and spilling blood.
And that's why when it gets to this thing, when he speaks of them making the idols and doing these things, he says, "Therefore, I'm going to make you an object of scorn to the nations and a laughingstock."
Whoa.
My goodness, I don't
Is
know
that
what
what you
means.
got?
Yeah, it says laughingstock to all the countries. What do you have there?
Yeah. Okay, let's read the next verse.
Those who are near and those who are far away will mock you. Oh, infamous city, full of turmoil.
Wow. So I want to see if there are other translations of verse 5, because I got something totally different in verse 5.
Okay.
So let's see what we got here. I'm going to pull up on my little computer program. Ezekiel 22, verse 5. JPS has, both the near and the far shall scorn you, O besmirched of name, O laden with iniquity. King James, those that be near and those that be far from thee shall mock thee. So that's pretty much the same thing. What were you reading from the NASB?
Yep, NIV.
Oh, NIV. Okay, so I don't need an NIV again. So NASB, which I have here on my computer, says, those who are near and those who are far from you will mock you. That's the same as the NIV there. NRSV has, same thing, will mock you. Let me tell you what it says in Hebrew. And I'm really surprised that you have all these different, basically the same translation by all these different translations, when it's so clear in Hebrew what it says. It says, those who are far, those who are near and those who are far from you, yitkalasuvach will, let me read the little translation. Those who are near and those who are far from you, they shall insult through you. unclean of name, she who has much panic. So what does that mean? And I understand they didn't get it, so they didn't translate it literally. They said, okay, it means they're going to insult you. But actually it says they're going to insult through, and actually they're going to insult each other through you, is what it means. And it's amazing how prophetic that statement is. Because in many languages and culture, calling someone a Jew is among the worst insults imaginable. For example, in Russian, where many of my people came from, Jews are never called Yid, the word which is Yid is just Yehudi, from Judah, Yehuda, but they're never called Yid because Yid is a curse. They're called Ivrei, which means Hebrews. If you call someone a Yid, that's a horrible curse. In America, can I say this? A cheap person is often called a Jew, and their actions are referred to as Jewing. In fact, I've met people who have said, I've gotten into the Torah and I'm so deep into Torah, and it's become so much a part of me that I don't say to Jew someone anymore. I'm like, wait, you used to say that? and my friend Bruce Brill tells a story of how he grew up on the East Coast.
What up, Bruce?
Hey, Bruce. He grew up in the East Coast, and he once had this person he was talking to, and she said, you're such a Jew, and I don't mean it in the bad way. So literally what Ezekiel said is they're going to insult through you to call someone a Jew. In many cultures and around the world, they're not politically correct as an insult. In Arabic, we're given this image that Jews in Christian countries suffered horribly, but we had this golden age in Arab countries and Muslim countries. Everything was hunky-dory. That's a complete lie. In Arabic, the curse Wayahud is the worst curse you can say to someone. And what it means in Arabic is, I swear, may you become a Jew. You're actually calling upon your deity, your God, in Arabic to cause someone to become a Jew. You're making an oath in the name of your God, Wayahud. May they become a Jew. And it's a very interesting little tidbit here. Daniel 3:12, the enemies of Israel, they say, there are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. They're speaking to the king. And one of the medieval Jewish commentators who lived in a Muslim country, he makes this remark. He says when the enemies of Israel referred to them as Jews, in that period of history, it just meant that they were from the kingdom of Judah, and it wasn't meant as a curse. To his readers, hearing, the enemies of Israel say, there are certain Jews, to them that's a curse. And so imagine that. The commentator has to explain, because in the medieval Islamic world, and even today in the Islamic world, calling someone a Jew is the worst curse. And I'm talking about you have a fight with your neighbor and you call him a Jew, not that he's actually a Jew. So he had to explain, no, they were called that because they were from Judah. And it's hard for me to fathom, because I grew up with a Jew being like something I was proud of, something that, to me, I was proud of being a Jew. And my father, of blessed memory, he told me something really interesting. He said that, and I didn't experience this, I don't know if this is true, but this is what he told me, and I've heard this from other people since, that before the 6-Day War, being called a Jew was, can I say this?
I'm not sure. We can always edit it out.
Okay, it was like being called the N-word.
Oh.
And if you were Jewish and you could blend in and pass, you didn't let people know you were Jewish. You kind of kept it to yourself, and you pretended that you were, not a Jew when you were among non-Jews. And I never experienced that. For me, being a Jew was something always I was proud of. That, there was this shift, I guess. And maybe, I think in some cultures it's shifting back. I know in Europe right now, people are embarrassed and terrified, actually, of admitting that they're Jewish. And I can imagine the children growing up now in Europe are, will grow up and say, wow, I don't want anybody to know I'm a Jew. That's such a hateful thing. And this is what I think the prophet is saying. He's saying, you've done such horrible things, and this is the curse. Those who are far and those who are near from you, they will curse each other through you.
That just makes such a major difference versus they will mock you. I mean, it's
right. And it doesn't say mock; it says they will curse through you. That's how I read it.
Well, that word is a pearl, Nehemia. I know it's early in the process, but I think you might need to explain that.
Well, and then he has this phrase, Timeat Hashem.
Yeah.
She who has an unclean name. That's an amazing thing, because we've talked about a lot about the name of Yehovah, and here through her actions, Israel's name has become, Jew has become a dirty word, and so that's something I think we need to overcome.
But here's what I like about maybe giving that word. If you'd be willing,
you want that to be the word. Didn't we already have a word of the week?
No. We just started. What are you talking about?
I'm sorry.
We've only been on the show for 5 minutes, sir.
No, we recorded. This is the third episode we're recording today.
What are you talking about?
This is the third episode we're recording today, so I got confused.
Okay.
All right. You want that to be the word?
Well, I'm just saying it's such a significant. It's maybe what I'm trying to do is for people to know that word in Ezekiel 22 verse 5. To know that word gives them an access to be able to go there and look.
So here, this is a little complicated, which is why I was hesitant.
It's more than complicated.
But, all right. So the word is yitkalsu, and as we said in biblical Hebrew, every word has a 3-letter root, except the ones that don't. Every word is a 3-letter root, and the 3-letter root here is kuf lamed samach.
But boy, oh boy, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different letters.
6 words. So we have 3 things
letters
going on here. We've got a prefix, we've got a suffix, and we've got something in the middle. Which is something to do. All right. So the prefix is yud, and the yud here means he. But then when you add the suffix u, it's yitkalsu. Then the he turns into they. So it's a prefix and a suffix that together mean they will. And then you have the tav there. The tav stuck in there is part of the. Remember we said there are 7 conjugations in biblical Hebrew, and the 7 conjugations. The 7th one is called hitpael, and that is often a passive or a reflexive verb. And in this case, arguably, it is reflexive. That is, they will. And
this is the key. Go ahead.
Yeah, they will curse each other, or they will curse themselves.
Now let me just stop. Let me stop for a second. I want people to know the significance of this. So here's where I would say that knowing some of that information really gives you a better understanding of how it's being translated. Without knowing that information, if you just had the word but not seeing, how the word is constructed, what the grammatical structure is for the word, it would be really hard for you. If you just had a 3-letter root, sometimes people go to a concordance and say, oh, the word is this and this is
it's
the concordance.
Strong's number 5021.
502. And here's what I want to be sensitive to people about. If that's all you know, that's what you got to go with. But if you can understand some of these other things. Now, I got to tell you, Nehemia, sometimes you are a difficult one. You're like, they say, sometimes Paul is hard to understand. It isn't. Sometimes it's hard to understand. No, it isn't because you try to be complicated. It's that the information is that important to know that of the 7 conjugations, to know that there's the suffix and the prefix. But I will say something, and maybe I'm going to be overly optimistic about this. I do think there's a way for people to know in a little bit more a simplistic fashion what it is and how it applies. And that's why I'm pushing you on this verse. I think you just gave us a pearl. Yeah. Like that is I think that's a pearl that you could run with. Yeah. But you could not get that pearl unless you're interacting with the linguistic information there. And again, what I want to do is try to give people a chance to have at least access to some of it. Now, you can't, look, how long did you go to Hebrew University? I mean, before you ever got to Hebrew University, you learned to read Hebrew as a child. Right. And then you went to Hebrew school. And then from there...
I actually didn't go to Hebrew school. I went to Jewish day school. Which means I was at the Jewish school learning Hebrew stuff pretty much all day. I mean, we also learned like math and science, but we spent all morning. We would start at something like 7-something in the morning and go until 1 o'clock learning Hebrew and Jewish subjects.
And that's amazing. That's amazing. So one of the things that people tend to think is they think, well, I'll never be able to interact with the information. And one of the things I want to use this word carefully, but I get excited about is always trying to find a way for people to get a bite-sized ability to interact with it. So that's what I'm working on right now. This is just an example, and I love to push you on this because you do know what the information is, and then once we find out what the application of the information is, like, wow. Like you were doing the study, you said, now I'm going to have to tell you about the 7 conjugations. And people might think, oh, no, but what? Why are those
7 conjugations and the 4 prefixes?
And the 4 prefixes.
And this is one of the 4 prefixes, yud, which means he, but then when it gets a suffix, it means they.
Absolutely. So anyway,
really
that's the word of the week. Yeah, that's the word of the week.
So easy.
Yeah, and basically,
Yit Kalsu.
Say that, folks. Yit Kalsu. You can say something that really is complicated, but really important.
They will curse themselves, or they will curse each other.
That's powerful. That really is powerful.
Yeah.
So, okay, we got through 5. Can we go to
Let's do 6? Let's do it.
Okay. See how each of the princes of Israel who are in you uses his power to shed blood. In you, they have treated father and mother with contempt. In you, and he's speaking again about the city, right? He's saying that in the city, in you.
How do we know it's in the city? So in the Hebrew, the you is feminine.
Feminine, right.
And cities in Hebrew are always feminine.
And it's so funny, but it's happened to be an irregular. So you think ear is going to be masculine because it doesn't have the feminine ending, but it's one of the irregulars that's feminine. That's that's kind of cute. Anyway,
and for those who don't know, every noun in Hebrew is either masculine or feminine, and you can usually tell which one it is based on the ending.
Yeah.
If it has the ending, kamatz, it's feminine, except words like cherev, sword, and ir, city, which are feminine even though they don't have that ending.
Yeah, and every once in a while, those are you say it. How do you say it? This is what it is, except in this situation.
This is the rule always, except where it's not.
In you, speaking about that city, in you, and it's again, mistreated fatherless and the widow, you have despised my holy things and desecrated my Sabbaths. Oh, wow. Man, oh man. You've despised my holy things and desecrated my Sabbaths.
What are the holy things?
What are the holy things?
So I think the common understanding or the default understanding would be what it talks about. I think it's Leviticus 21 or 22, which is the section where it has the holy things. They are sacrifices and offerings and basically things that can only be eaten in a state of ritual purity. That may be what he's referring to.
Okay. But you are a slanderous men bent on shedding blood, and you are those who eat at the mountain shrines and commit lewd acts. These are things that are taking place. There are mountain shrines. There are people. We talked about that earlier.
Well, I mean, when I hear about the mountain shrines, and what it literally says isn't mountain shrines. It says literally, and to the mountains they did eat in you or through you. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is Ezekiel 18 and Ezekiel 33. And we won't go through the whole thing, but in fact, this is homework for people. Go read Ezekiel 18. It's a fascinating passage. It deals with the question of, will a person be punished for their own sins or for the sins of their fathers? And the basic message there is, if you continue your father's sin, you'll be punished. If you depart from your father's sin, you will not be punished. His sin won't be remembered. You're only responsible for your own actions if you repent. And you could do evil and you turn to good. Your own sins won't be remembered, and vice versa. If you live your whole life doing righteousness and turn to sin, then your righteousness is no longer remembered to you. And the people hear this and they say, the way of the Lord is not fair, it's not equal, it's not measured, it's not weighed. And God says, no, my way is measured, yours isn't. But there it mentions eating to the mountains as one of or eating at the mountain shrines, as yours translates, as one of the issues that's mentioned there. And it's a few chapters before. And
I think one of the things that is interesting about the list is that it's not exhaustive.
It's not everything, right?
No, it's not everything, but the things that are selected, you sometimes, at least for me anyway, as I'm reading, I'm like, okay, well, that's just like this. And it's like, we were talking about injustice, how the widow is treated, how usury is, it's like two different things, but they have the same...
Well, but it's also, this list is the big things. If we see something in this list repeatedly, then that's really important. And one of the passages...
Would you be willing to give us the list from rather than us saying, okay, this is what it says? Like, could you give us the list? It's in 2 verses here.
Well, it's more than 2 verses.
No, it's 9... Oh, well, no, he started 8.
It goes through verse 12.
He goes through 12, yes.
Right. So let's see what we got here. Let's try to make a list.
Yep.
So we've got, and really we could start in verse 7 even, about dishonoring the father and the mother,
the alien,
persecuting the stranger, the foreigner. We've got the deceiving or treating badly the widow and the orphan. Is that 2 or is that 1? Despising the holy things, desecrating the Shabbat.
Yes.
We've got Anshe Rachil. Yours translates that as slander, but actually that word in Hebrew I think is better translated as a gossiper. For example, in Leviticus we have lo telech achil b'amecha, don't go about as a gossiper among your people. It's the same word there. In order to spill blood, what does blood have to do with gossip? Well, life and death is in the power of the tongue, and if you gossip about somebody and shame them, it's as if you've killed them. And we've got this, I guess you might call it a ritual commandment, not to worship or eat at the mountain shrines, which is really interesting because what does that mean? When they were eating at those mountain shrines, they probably said, "I'm so holy, I'm bringing my offering to the Lord." Except it was an illicit.
Do you think they
illegal.
thought they were bringing it to the Lord, or they thought they knew it was a mountain shrine?
They knew it was a mountain shrine, but it was Yehovah. It just was. It was not according to what He commanded. And it actually is reminiscent of the Torah portion where they brought the strange incense. It wasn't to Baal, it was to Yehovah, but it was contrary to what He commanded. Verse 10, we've got what we might call, am I allowed to say this?
Just say it.
Oh, yeah, it's incest or sexual immorality in verse 10. There is something very interesting, which is in the Western world, they don't think of it as sexual morality, but it's having relations with a menstruating woman. Mm-hmm. There's a set of commandments in Leviticus that talk about during that time you can't have relations with the woman, and actually for 7 days from when her menstruation begins. Mm-hmm. That's called a nidah. And here, this is one of the biggies. It's up there with having sex with your father's wife. I mean, imagine that with your stepmom. I mean, that's how big a deal it is. And we're talking about your own wife. Mm-hmm. So verse 11 is adultery. Let's see, and then more incest, some more incest. Taking bribes in verse 12. Imagine that, taking a bribe is up there with incest.
To shed blood,
I mean, and again, to shed blood, right? And then here in verse 12, we've got taking money on interest, or you could call it usury, and that's probably a whole discussion. Mm-hmm. Where does interest end and usury begin? It's not clear that the Torah has that distinction. Mm-hmm. But basically, somebody comes to you, they're in need, and instead of just giving them the money as a loan, which they'll probably never pay back, that's the thought in Scripture, then you're saying, no, you got to pay it back, and you got to pay it back with interest. Mm-hmm. Let's see. So it's unjust gain it talks about here. And it says, "And me you forgot," says Lord Yehovah.
And that is
at the end of the list in verse 12.
And you have forgotten me. Wow.
Right, you have forgotten me. And I want to look at Psalm 15. I always think of Psalm 15 when I see this list. And the reason I think of Psalm 15 is we've got another list there. And this would be the homework for people. Go look for yourselves. What are the things that appear?
Is it going to be real homework, or are you going to do it for them? I'm
going to read Psalm 15.
Okay.
A Psalm of David. Yehovah, who may sojourn in your tent? Who may dwell in your holy mountain? And the image here is there's Levites standing at the entrance to the temple, and they're saying, who's really allowed to come into this temple? And then there's a list of things that they have to do. He who lives without blame, who does what is right, and in his heart acknowledges the truth, whose tongue is not given to evil, meaning he's not slandering, not gossiping, who has never done harm to his fellow or borne reproach for his acts towards his neighbor, for whom a contemptible man is abhorrent, but who honors those who fear Yehovah, who stands by his oath even to his hurt. Keep your word even if it's not good for you. Who has never lent money at interest. Isn't it amazing that appears in both lists? Or accepted a bribe against the innocent. The man who acts thus shall never be shaken. And it's saying, basically, these are the people who can come in. If this isn't you, think about whether you should even be coming here. Maybe you need to repent before you come to the temple and perform the ritual. The ritual is not going to help you if you're a sinner. So yeah, I love that Psalm 15, and the homework will be to go look in 2 or 3 different translations and compare this, and compare the other passage, compare it with Ezekiel 18.
We are truly progressing by giving people homework, and we're going to continue to do this between now and the end of Prophet Pearls, because we do want people to interact with this information and to be able to figure out what it says. Yeah. So now I do think, and I don't know what the image gets, what image you get when I read this, but I actually, and maybe you can tell me where else this shows up. He says, I will surely strike my hands together. Do we have another example where we see that? And I'm pretty sure we do. I don't know if it's in that exact phrase, but what is that? What is that? Okay, so that's what it says. I mean, to be able to smite my palms or my hands. I mean, what message did that send?
What do you got?
I don't know. I mean, I will surely strike my hands together at the end. In other words, it's like a physical manifestation of how frustrated or.
So what's the actual image here? Is he clapping his hands?
Striking his hands together, making a sound, making an act, a physical action. It's like, doing something and the demonstration of the frustration. I don't know.
It's not so clear to me. I will strike my hands over ill-gotten gain. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Nowhere else?
I see. Hold on a second. Let me see what we got here. Okay. I can do my little search here.
Okay.
If you want to.
We've got it. I've got to get this. Yeah. I've got to get the search.
Yeah.
I'll strike my hands together as you're looking at what? At the unjust gain you have made, and at the blood you have shed in your midst. So whatever this physical.
So, for example, in Ezekiel 6:11, thus says Lord Yehovah, strike your hands together, same phrase in Hebrew, and stamp your feet and cry, aha, over all the vile abominations of the house of Israel.
Yes.
So it's like stamping your foot and clapping your hands.
Oh, yes.
In
the rest.
Yeah, but I think in the context, and then Ezekiel 21:19 says, further, son of man, prophesy striking hand against hand. So that's clapping.
Yep.
So Ezekiel 21:22, I too will strike hand against hand and will satisfy my fury upon you.
Yep.
Yeah. It still is kind of an unusual phrase. I'll grant you that. And Ezekiel seems to really like that phrase. He's got it a bunch of times.
It's like there's a demonstration. A physical, really is a physical demonstration. But I mean, it's like the clapping of thunder.
Well, here, 2 Kings 11:12, Jehoiada then brought out the king's son and placed upon him crown and the insignia. They anointed him and proclaimed him king. They clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the king!" And here it's the same phrase in Hebrew. And here it's a good thing, meaning so it can be done in frustration, but can also be done in joy.
In joy.
And it's interesting that most of the times this phrase appears in the Tanakh, it's in Ezekiel.
Yeah.
He really likes this phrase.
He likes the phrase.
In fact, as far as I can find, the only time it appears out of Ezekiel is that passage I just read in Kings. Interesting. So, yeah, and in Ezekiel it seems to be a negative thing, whereas in Kings it's a positive thing. Okay. Yeah.
So he says, I'll strike his hands together. We read that. Then here comes a little bit of the shift. Will your courage endure or your hands be strong in the day I deal with you? I, Yehovah, have spoken, and I, in fact, will do it. I will disperse you among the nations and scatter you through the countries, and I will put an end to your uncleanness. One more verse. When you have been defiled in the eyes of the nations, you will then know that I am Yehovah. Man, oh man, we've seen that. Have we not seen that, where he's dispersed them? I mean, we have the physical examples, historical examples of that. And I got to say something about Ezekiel. When I'm reading it, sometimes I have to tell you that these are probably the passages where I mostly want to find what you talk about, saying the good news at the end, ending on a high note. Tell me, please, Nehemia. We're going to end on a high note.
Yeah. now read me verse 16 again.
I'll read 16. It says, when you have been defiled.
What?
Here's what it says in the note.
22:16.
Yeah. Here's what it says in the note. Or when I have allotted you your inheritance.
Wow. That's the opposite meaning. Meaning, is this a bad thing that's going to happen to them in verse 16 or a good thing? And let's just read some translations. NRSV says, and I shall be profaned through you in the sight of the nations.
Yes.
JPS says, you shall be dishonored in the sight of the nations. But then we have, for example, let's see the NIV. Well, you just read the NIV. When you have been defiled in the eyes of the nations, that's a bad thing. King James has, and you shall take your inheritance in yourself in the sight of the heathen. That's the opposite.
Yeah.
And what's going on here? So the Hebrew here is a verb that means to inherit. And it very well could be to take inheritance. And that would have been my default translation. And here's how I read the passage. And I'm just doing something here real quick on the computer. Here, so for example, the same word appears in Numbers 34:29. These are they whom Yehovah commanded to divide the inheritance unto the children of Israel in the land of Canaan. And the word is linachel. And I got to tell you, this is really, really controversial because in modern Hebrew, there's this concept of the settlers. And when the news around the world speaks about settlers, it's almost like they say the word evil settlers. Settlers are Jews who steal Palestinian land and live on the West Bank. Stolen land. And the way Jews see it is actually we're fulfilling this verse, Numbers 34:29. We're dividing up the land that was given to us by God, and we're going back and retaking what was ours from God, going back 3,500 years. And this is the word nachal. It's to divide up the inherited portion. And when I read it, it's clear to me in verse 16 of Ezekiel 22, and I could be wrong. Many translations disagree with me, but it's the word v'nichalt, and you will divide up the inheritance through you or in you in the eyes of the nations, and you will know that I am Yehovah. And what's happening here? In verse 15, he's scattering them among the nations. That's the exile, the diaspora. And then it says literally here, and I will cause your uncleanness to end from you. That's at the end of verse 15. And now that the uncleanness has ended, you're going to come back and divide up the land that was taken away from you. So literally these people who are called evil settlers are literally a fulfillment of this verse here in Ezekiel 22:16. And I can understand why your translations didn't want that. And you might say, well, wait a minute, the JPS also has it as a negative thing. That's because there's a lot of liberal Jews who also refer to settlers as evil settlers.
Oh my goodness, you're kidding me. Did you just say that?
That's right.
You think that's...
There's many Jews in Israel who believe the reason we don't have peace with the Palestinians is because My sister has a place to live. Literally, my sister Ariella lives out in the so-called West Bank, which I can tell you is a 10-minute, 15-minute drive from here. And this is Jerusalem, the capital of Israel.
Place.
It's a beautiful place. And it's amazing. You stand her so-called West Bank settlement. You stand on the hill and you look as far as the eye can see, 360 degrees. You won't see an Arab anywhere. Not a single Arab town, not a single Arab anything. And that's land they stole from the Palestinians. There was no one living there before then. So it's whatever. These people live in a fantasy world, and these are the same sorts of people who say that ISIS is cutting off the heads of Americans because we're not giving them jobs. It's the same kind of mentality, and both of those are a fulfillment. I think of the previous verse about the world cursing themselves through the Jews.
This is a pearl,
and now we've got the exile. The redemption, and we finally have in verse 16, the end of
so basically what you're saying here
the redistribution
is
of the land.
16 ends up being the good note. In other words, when I'm reading it's not a good note. But again, to say that, you said that in the JPS it's possible that there'd be liberal Jews. Are you saying that in the translation process there's even an agenda sometimes in the JPS?
Absolutely, no question about it. Every translation is someone's interpretation, and this is clearly the case there.
Okay.
No question about it.
Well, 22:16 is one people need to look at. That's a game changer. That verse. It really is. It really is. Yeah. It's a game changer. It's giving a completely different perspective to what's happening. Like he literally brings the good news at the end.
Well, and that's the end of the prophecy. Meaning, verse 17 is a new prophecy. It starts out, and the word of Yehovah came to me saying.
Yeah.
But no question. I mean, and let's think about this for a minute. If this is this punishment. He ends, and you will know that I am Yehovah. So how is it that they know that he's Yehovah? Because they were cast out into the exile? I guess. But here's how I'm reading this prophecy. Just as you will be known as a curse among the nations, and you will become known as blessed among the nations. That's what verse 16 is. It's an undoing. We've got the curse, and now we've got this blessing. And this is so that you and the nations will know that Yehovah is real. And that's what it's about. So when I see my sister's house in the West Bank, and it's surrounded by desert for miles around, no air. It's such a desert that no Arab ever wanted to even live there. And I see this thriving, beautiful community, and I look at that. I don't see evil settlers. I see a fulfillment of prophecy, and I know that Yehovah is the creator.
It's interesting when I hear the sound, v'nachalt, I think of the nachal. You know what I'm thinking? And I think of what's actually like there, like the water and the streams and the division of and it's like, wow. I mean, this verse, honestly, Nehemia, like if I were taking we did something called Scripture Bites at BFA International, where I took the 10 Commandments, went through the 10 Commandments, the 10 matters, and each verse gave people an ability to interact with the information. But this is the kind of verse that would be so awesome to do in that sort of program, because it's something that you just wouldn't see in reading an average English.
And just so you understand, and maybe this should have been in the word of the week.
I think
because the way I'm reading it is
we need two words of the week.
So the way I'm reading it, and the way the King James read it, is that the root is nun chet lamed, and it's a PL form, and it means you will divide up the land, just like I read the verse in Numbers. But the way that the other translations, who are saying it as a negative thing, is they're reading it as halal, and it's a nifal verb then from to desecrate.
And you know what's so funny about that is that, again, here's where you have to go further, because I could go and look here at my program and it would come up and it'd say, exactly, that's what it is. Chet lamed lamed.
Yeah, to desecrate.
It's a nifal perfect. And to have this other, it really is. This is a pearl.
Yeah.
I know you probably think I'm beating this thing. This is a pearl. This is a game-changing pearl, because what you're saying is, okay, so then in today, those people that are quote unquote settling are seeing this as a negative. This is a negative. It's definitely negative. You guys are the reason that we're having
evil settlers.
The evil settlers.
It's the reason that there's no peace.
Yeah. Wow.
Right? And this is why they're blowing up, buildings, because they don't have jobs and they're poor. Wait a minute. Recently, we're pre-recording this, we found out about this guy named Jihadi John, and it turns out he comes from a really, good family in England. And,
You mean the ISIS guy?
The ISIS guy, he had, opportunity. He wasn't poor and jobless. He's just an evil human being who ascribes to an evil theology and an evil doctrine. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Well, that's the end of that prophecy, and then it moves on. We've got 3 more verses. Shall we continue or no?
Let's do it.
Okay. So here we go. Verse 17, I'm sorry.
This is a little bit of a problem because verses 17 through 22 is the next prophecy, but our section ends after verse 19. So in the middle of the prophecy.
I'm going to say it real quick. Then the word of Yehovah came unto me. Again, here's this example. Son of man, the house of Israel has become dross to me. And this is really, wow. All of them are the copper, tin, iron. Did they combine all those words? Copper, tin, iron, and lead left inside a furnace.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Is that what dross is? What's left behind? We talked about this before.
Yeah, so we've got to talk a little bit about how they would refine in ancient times. And I think it's probably pretty much the same today.
Yep, they are but the dross of silver.
Yeah, so what they would do is they would take this ore, not iron ore, they would take ore, and they would heat it up, and the impurities that came out, that was called dross, and what was left behind would be silver. And actually, in those impurities, you can extract so-called impurities. If you're trying to get silver, you can extract other metals, and particularly lead, but also some of the other metals will be found in that dross, in that impurity. And then there'll be just stuff that's just garbage that you throw away. It's called slag. So yeah, and what's interesting to me about this is, it mentions 5 metals.
Yep.
In ancient times, they knew about 7 metals. One of them is never mentioned in the Tanakh, at least as far as we can tell. 6 are mentioned: silver, copper, tin, iron, and lead. And the other one that's not mentioned in this passage or in this verse at least, is gold. And then the 7th one, which isn't mentioned in the Tanakh, is mercury. It's possible mercury was mentioned, but in ancient times it was known as quicksilver. So maybe sometimes when it mentions silver, it means mercury. Today we have many metals. We have uranium. We've got polonium, and I don't know, a bunch of other metals, tungsten, and whatever. We've got 92 elements in the periodic table, and a whole bunch of those are metals. And but back in ancient times, they identified 6 or 7 metals, and here it mentions 5 of them. And the image here is of God, again, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, of the crucible. The crucible is this vessel that you heat something up really, really hot, or it's a furnace, you heat it up really, really hot, and that causes a separation of the metal so you can get out the silver, and what's left behind is the dross, or the slag. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what happens. But look at what the last verse is, Nehemia.
Yeah.
And I think this is the part that kind of makes me, I don't say good news, bad news, whatever, but he says, but therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says: because you have all become dross, then I'm thinking, because you become dross, I'm going to throw you away. And it says, because you've become dross, I will gather you into Jerusalem. So when you hear that phrase, what is it? I'll gather you into Jerusalem. I mean, isn't that what we want?
Well, I'm going to pick up that dross. I'm going to extract the remaining silver from it. That's the image here. That's the image of this crucible of the refiner's fire. And it's an image we have in other places, Malachi, for example. But it's very clear here. It's a beautiful image. I was in Cambodia last year, and I actually went through the marketplace, and you could see them refining metals with a blowtorch, just like in the old days. They were refining metal. A lot of it was gold and silver in a crucible. Except for the fact that they were using propane. Other than that, nothing's really changed between back in the old days. It was fire, and you take a bellows and make it really hot. Other than that, it's this kind of processing still goes on today. It's pretty cool.
Well, I didn't give you. I don't know if you have something that you'd like to say about what's going on right now. I know last time we talked about the ministry that we're doing. I have to tell you, I get really excited when we trip over or when we come across something that really you just can't get it unless you're willing to do a little digging. The jumping, diving into the water and going through it and finding it. And again, 22:16 for me is a game changer, and I really appreciate that because again, from a casual looking, even if you've got some of the tools, there's the translation. They're saying this is the 3-letter root. All of a sudden, there's another possibility that's not the 3-letter root. I mean, oh my goodness!
I think it's interesting that the King James got it right.
The King James
which
got
is
it
considered
right.
to be a bad translation, but in this case, they actually got it right. We tend to think, they're I don't know. I tend to think the King James are a bunch of bumbling idiots, but sometimes they get it right.
I can't believe you said what you said about the JPS translators. I mean, but that one we're gonna have to really maybe edit that out.
An agenda sometimes. It's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think it's my turn to say a prayer. Do you have anything you want to say? Anything else you want to bring up before we move on?
Nope.
Okay, awesome. Father, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for the ability to interact with your word in its language, history, and context, and to have the availability of tools to get behind what the translators, and sometimes in some cases, do have an agenda for. Thank you that when you chose the language of Hebrew, it's the perfect language for you to communicate the purpose and of your will and your word. Help us to have a desire and a focus and a willingness to interact with this holy tongue so that we can understand just exactly what you were saying, what you are saying now, what you are going to be saying, and what it means for us in our life. In your holy name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you for listening to Prophet Pearls with Nehemia Gordon and Keith Johnson. For more information, please visit nehemiaswall.com and bfainternational.com.